If you're new to Adobe Premiere Pro, then opening up Premiere for the very first time can be really intimidating. How do you import your footage? How do you even create a new sequence? How do you edit your video and create text effects? There's so much, but what I'm going to do in this video, I'm going to run you through everything that you need to know in order to get started and to actually make and export a video. So let's get into it. So every single video project in Adobe Premiere Pro begins here. This is the first screen you'll see once you've loaded up Premiere. These are all of our previous projects, or instead of that, you could go to Open Project and open your project here. But let's assume we're creating a new project, so we'll select New Project. That will open up this window. Now, as you'll see in the top left window, you've got project name. So let's rename this to Brooker Films. And then you can decide where you want to place this. So you can put this at home, on the desktop, in your documents, in your downloads. We'll just stick this on the desktop for now. And then we'll just go ahead and select Create. And that has created the project. So just to confirm, that's not creating a sequence, that is creating a project. So a project is the entire project, and a sequence is where the video will be edited. So let's go ahead and create a new sequence. So we'll go File, New, Sequence. And that is going to create our new sequence. Now, we've got all of these presets. These are two custom ones that I have made for ease of use. But you can see we've got all of these different presets, which are going to give us quite a lot of information. But basically what I like to do is I go to Settings, go into a custom editing mode. I select a time base of 25 frames per second, and this is just what's the frame rate of your project. If you're in England, that's going to be 25, or if you're in America, that's probably going to be 30 or 24. Then you've got the frame size. So this is 1920 by 1080, 3840 by 2160, basically 4K, 1080, 5K. This is your project or your video size. So I'm going to go for 4K here, or a 4K UHD. Then you can go ahead and select a pixel aspect ratio of 1, no field progressive scan. Everything else there is completely fine, and we'll just rename this to Video 1. So now we need to go ahead and import some footage. So we would do that by going to the Project tab, which is down here. And if you can't see the Project tab, then all you need to do is go up into Window and go down to Projects and make sure that that project is enabled. Now, from here, you want to create a new bin. So that's this button here, which is basically a folder. A bin is a folder. And we'll just rename this to Footage. Now we'll go into that bin, go into the Media Browser window, and we're going to go ahead and navigate through to your footage. So I'm going to go for Lumix 1, select this folder, and we'll just import everything in this folder. So this is just a previous YouTube video. This is all of the raw footage that I was using in that project. Now, there's many different ways to get your footage onto the timeline. The way that I do it is the lazy way, but that's the way that I've always done it. So doing it the more organized and more clean way doesn't really work for me, but I just select everything and I just drag it in. I keep the existing settings. And the reason why we're getting this here is because the video is a larger aspect ratio than the project itself. So the project is set to 4K UHD, but this footage is actually a bit larger, and it's got a few different other settings. But once you've done that, you can just scrub through, and this is all of our footage. Now, like I said, that is the lazy way to do that. Instead, the more professional way of doing this is to go into a clip. So let's select this one. So 1627. You'd watch through, pick the moment that you're looking for, select an in point, scrub through to the point where you want it to finish, select the out point, and then drag that over into the project. However, like I said, I don't like that method. I just like to drag everything all in one go, like this. Now, as you'll hear, the audio in this video is not great. But what makes a match cut different to it? And that's because that is the audio from the camera. So I'm just going to go ahead and import my audio files as well. So this is the video file. So in order to do that, I'm just going to create a new bin and select audio. Go into that audio folder. We'll go back to the media browser, and then we could just navigate through to the audio. So that's in my Zoom folder. And if I just go ahead and select the last folder, you can see I've got this audio file. So I'm just going to press import. and we can drag that over into the timeline. And in order to sync these up, I've actually created a sync clap. So in the video, I just made a sharp clap, and that created a visual mark. As you can see, that is where I clapped. So I'll make a cut there. That's where I clapped in the audio, and I'll put these together. So as you can hear, I've now got my professional audio. In this video, I'm going to show you linked to my video. So essentially what you would do from this point is you would get all of your media imported. So if you had any images, I would get those imported into the project tab and put that into its own bin. Or if you've got other footage, get that imported as well. But this is where all of your footage is going to live. And you can have this view. So as you can see, it's just a list and it gives me a breakdown. Or if you select the icon view, then it will give you thumbnails. So you can go into each folder and you can view the thumbnail view so that you can visually see what you're going to import, which is really cool. And of course, the great thing is as well with Premiere, its organization tools are really handy. So for example, if I wanted to go into the footage and maybe the first 4 takes were not great takes, I could select all of those, right click, and we can just go ahead and label that. So let's go for rows. We'll say red is bad. And then maybe the next 3 are really good takes. So we'll go in and label these and we'll say mango, which is bright orange, is a good take. And then we can quickly see that the orange clips are the good clips and the red clips are the bad clips. So that's a really quick and easy way to visually see what's a good take and what's not a good take. Now, if you're creating a video and it's only a small edit and there's not a lot of footage or assets, then you probably won't see the benefit of this. But if you're in a really complicated edit and you've got footage spanning across different days of filming and you've got images and audio and dialogue recordings and all sorts of different media, then being able to mark takes visually is going to really help you to save time. And of course as well, if we just expand this tab, so in order to do that, we'll just double click the tab and that should expand that. You can also go into all of this information and rename things. So if we wanted these first 4 to be bad takes, instead of having them there cluttering up the project, we could just go into the end section here, which says hide, and we can just hide those. So now at this point, we definitely don't have the option of accidentally using this footage. And the same thing goes for good takes. So if these 3 orange takes are good takes, we can mark these as good takes. And that's much easier to see now. So we can see these are good takes and these should definitely be used in the edit. And of course, as well, you've got all of the video info as well. So you've got 4096 by 2160, 48,000 hertz with audio recording and all of this other information. So I would create a new project, create a new sequence, import all of your footage, and then organize all of that footage in the project tab so that you know exactly what you are looking for. When it comes to editing your video, we're going to go ahead and use this timeline here. So if we double select the timeline, you can see this is our timeline. Now, the way that Premiere works with this timeline is you by default have 3 tracks of video and 3 tracks of audio. And when it comes to audio, everything is merged together. So if you had 2 audio files directly on top of each other like this, then you would hear both of them playing at the same time. However, when it comes to video, if you did the same thing, if you had video on video layer 1 and video layer 2, then you would only see the video on video layer 2 unless you change the size of the top video to reveal the video below. So when it comes to your timeline, if you want something to be visible, put that higher up on the timeline. So if you're creating text with a video, you would put the text on top of the video. So the text would live on a higher level. And of course, if you're editing a music video and you've got 20 performance takes that you need to add in, then all you need to do to create those extra tracks is to just drag your videos up like this. And as you can see, I'm creating loads of new tracks and you could just keep going up and up and up. Alternatively though, you could create a new sequence. So file, new sequence. We'll go into our settings, check all of the settings are correct. Then we'll go to tracks and we can actually add as many tracks as we need over here. So this sequence now has 50 video tracks and we'll even add some more audio tracks. We'll press OK, and now in this sequence you can see we've got all of those video tracks available to us. Now if we're just quickly looking at the timeline again, these eyeballs are going to turn on or turn off that layer. So if you can see a line through it and it's a blue color, that means it's disabled, so we're not going to see that. But if it's white without the strike through, then it's fine. Now, if you're copying and pasting media, the keyboard shortcut for that is Command and C to copy, or Control and C on Windows, and then Command and V or Control and V. But you can see it has pasted onto video layer 1. So if we wanted to avoid that and we wanted to paste it up here onto one of the higher tracks, we would deselect this option here and we'd go up to a higher track. So if we wanted to paste onto 8, I would select V8 and paste. But it's really important you deselect the ones underneath because it will always paste onto the track which has the lowest selection. So as you can see, even though V1 and V8 are both selected, that has pasted onto V1. So just make sure V1 is unchecked in order for that paste to work. Now, when it comes to cutting video, all you need to do is just go to the start or the end of the video and just drag that over. So as you can see, I've cut the start and I've cut the end. Now, alternatively, if you wanted to make a cut in the video, you would go to the razor tool. So if we click out of this, we'll go to this option here, which is the razor tool. And as you can see, the keyboard shortcut is C, and you would just make a cut. So you can now just use this part of the video, and we can move that to over here and take a cut from this video. And now we've got two videos that cut into each other like that. So that is your basic editing in Premiere. Now, of course, if you wanted to do a fade, then you would go into opacity. So in order to create this fade, we want these to overlap. So I'm going to pull the second video down and across a bit. Then we'll go onto the top video, go back in time. We'll go up to effect controls. And again, if you can't see effect controls, then you might have to enable it from the window tab. And as you can see, you've got position, scale, rotation, anchor point, anti-flicker, opacity. So to create that fade, we're going to create a keyframe on opacity. Now, animation is controlled with keyframes in Adobe Premiere Pro. It's essentially saying at this point, the data is this, and at this point, the data is this, and I'm going to transition between here to here during this time frame. So essentially, if I created a point or a keyframe at 100% here, and then I moved over a second and I changed that down to 0, you can see the information has changed on that track to say here it is 100, here it is 0, and now it's going to fade out, as you can see. So even though we've got this video enabled on the timeline, you can see it there, the opacity has now disappeared to 0%, so it is no longer visible. So that's a little bit about keyframe animation, but I'll get more onto that a little bit later on. So let's just explore the rest of this effect controls tab. So in motion, we've got position, scale, rotation, anchor point, and anti-flicker. So if we just select this video here, we'll go to position. Now, if we move this number left or right, that is going to be your position on the horizontal axis. So we can move it over here, or we can move it over here. We can do exactly what we want with this. And then the next button is going to be your vertical. So this is going to go up or down. Then the next one down is scale. So this is essentially how big is the video. So I could zoom all the way in and I could adjust the position. That's a very flattering video. Or I can pull that back down to 100% and reset that in the middle to get our full size video back. And again, keyframe animation is going to work with all of these as well. So if we went to the start of this video, create a keyframe on scale and position, and then we moved maybe a second in time and increase that scale all the way up to 130. And as you can see, we can't see what's happening here because the video above is blocking us. So let's just delete that for now. And then let's move the position. Now, if we go back to the beginning of that clip and we play this back, you can see we've got this nice scale in and position adjustment. But of course, moving down, we have got rotation, which is very simple. And then we've got anchor point. Now, there's a little bit more to anchor point. It's not self-explanatory. So if we were to pull this scale all the way down to a small number, reset the rotation and turn off the other layers, you would see this is our video. Now, if we select the anchor point, this circle in the middle is the anchor point. So if I was to adjust the rotation, it would rotate around that point. However, if I move the anchor point to the top left and now I adjusted the rotation, you can see the video rotates around that point. So even though I'm adjusting the rotation, it's very different between those two variations because I've changed the anchor point. So if you're animating something and it's not quite working, it looks a little bit off, then it might be because your anchor point is not in the center. So if I move that to the center now and adjust the rotation, you can see that looks a lot better. Now, if you really mess up your settings and you don't know what the numbers are to get them back to normal, then all you need to do is just reset using the arrow. So you would just reset the parameters like this. And that's going to take everything back to the default settings. Now in opacity, you can see we've already adjusted the opacity, but just below that we have blend mode. Now a blend mode is essentially just a way that Premiere is going to blend one video with another video or one asset to another asset. So you won't see it at the moment because there's nothing underneath, but if I turn the video below on, now that we've dissolved, you can see that this is just a little bit different. So this is going to look really different. So we could create a transition using that dissolve, or alternative, we can go down to darken, we can multiply, we can color burn. Essentially, it's just going to use different ways of blending two shots together, or even more than two shots. You can put the blend mode on multiple different clips on top of each other to create a really interesting effect. When you're making effects in Premiere, the blend mode is going to be one of those features that is used quite frequently. So I would definitely recommend taking the time to go through each and every one to fully understand what they are doing. But typically the ones you're going to use the most are going to be your screen and your overlay or soft light. Essentially, the screen is going to remove black, the soft light is going to remove white, and overlay is just going to create an overlay. So if you've got an asset like a lens flare video, for example, you can use the overlay filter on that and it will overlay that on top of your video, essentially blending the two videos together and making it look better. Next up, we've got the effects tab. Now your effects tab might be up here, it might be down here, it might be over in the top right. Doesn't matter where it is, the effects tab is going to do the exact same thing. Now, like I just did, you can move all of these tabs around and put them in different positions and customize this as much as you like. All you need to do is just hover over a tab and move it. But in the effects tab, you will have all of your presets. You've got color presets in here, and then you've got all of your audio effects. So you've got delay and echo, you've got amplitude and compression, you've got reverb effects, you've got loads of different effects in there. You've got your audio transitions, so you've got your crossfades. Then you've got your video effects, and this is where you're going to find all of your video effects. So you've got some distortion, some color correction, some blurring and sharpening. You've got your keying, which is green screen, and loads of other effects here. And then, of course, you've got the pre-created video transitions. So you've got zooms, wipes, slides, peels, obsolete effects, and loads more. So you'll find all of your effects in that tab there. And in order for an effect to work, all you need to do is just drag it onto the video. So if I just go back to effect controls and pull the opacity of this layer up to 100%, we'll now go back to effects and let's go into video effect. Let's search for levels. This is an effect that I use a lot. Levels is essentially just a way of adjusting the level of light in each individual channel. So if we drop levels on and then go into effect controls, you can see all we need to do is just pull some of these sliders and it's going to have an effect on the video. Now, like I said, levels is going to separate the colors. So you've got an RGB effect. So this is going to change the black input level, the white input level, the output level on the black and the output level on the white, and the gamma on the RGB channels, then on the red channels, then on the green channels, then on the blue channels. So you can create some really interesting effects. Now, one of my favorite transitions that I like to use is actually created in levels. So what I do is I take the white input level, I pull that all the way down to a bright number, create a brand new keyframe, go back, pull that up to 255, and then go across and pull that up to 255 again. So it's going 255 up to that bright number, which would be 88, and then back down to 255 to create a flash. And I love to use that as a way to transition between video clips. Now, I've already mentioned keyframes, but keyframes are a really important part of Premiere. It's the way that you do any animation in Premiere. So if you wanted to create that flash transition, as you will see, that is going to be done with keyframes. If you're creating any type of movement, then that's going to be keyframe led. If you're creating a color transition, that will also be keyframe led. And there's a lot to keyframes, to be honest, but essentially all you're doing is just creating a point at a specific point, moving across, creating another point and changing the number. And that's pretty much it. Now you can get fancy and convert those keyframes to Bezier, auto Bezier, continuous Bezier, hold, ease in and ease out. They're all going to do different things, but generally the one that you need to know about is an ease in. If we just look at this animation, so we'll go from 100 all the way up to 150, you'll see when the keyframe hits, the animation starts and then stops as soon as it hits the other one. But if we highlight all of those and we convert those to ease in, so in order to do that, you're selecting all, right-clicking on one of them, temporal and ease in. Now when we watch that back, you can see it looks a lot smoother. The animation has rounded off really nicely here. And like I said, this can be done with your effects as well. So if we go into video effects and we search for, let's go for a crop. We'll drop crop onto the video. We'll go to effect controls. And at the same time as this position animation and the scale animation, we'll create a new keyframe on the crop on all four of those options. We'll move over and all channels can be cropped. If we just turn off the layer below, we'll really see that. So as you can see, we've got the position and the scale keyframe animation, but then we've also got that crop animation at the same time. So you can combine keyframe animation with any effect, and that's going to be how you're going to create these amazing effects inside of Premiere. It is the backbone of any type of animation or effect within this program. Now, moving on, how do we create text in Adobe Premiere? Well, it's actually really simple. So I'm just going to clear the timeline. So I'm going to select everything and delete that, just so that we've got all of the space to work with. Now I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger and we'll turn on video layer 1 and 2. Now, in order to create that text, there are a few different ways, but the best way is to just select the type tool. So you can see this bar here, you've got the type tool. And as you'll see in brackets, there is T. That is a keyboard shortcut. So you can either press T or you can just select T on your keyboard to load up the type tool. Then you just type in your video and you type out a word or a phrase of your choice. Then we'll go into the effect controls window, or you could go into essential graphics. They can be controlled either way, but typically I like to do this in effect controls. Then you go into the text window here. And as you can see, you've got the font here, so you can change the font. I like to go for Monster Rat. Then you can change the weight here. You can change the size of this here. You can left align, center align, or right align the text. I typically just center up. You've got your character spacing. You've got your faux bold, italic, all caps, all your other settings here. Line spacing is there. And then you've got appearance as well. So you can add a fill, or you can change the color of that fill by selecting the box. Or alternatively, if you didn't want fill and you wanted an outline, you could select stroke. And same thing, you select the box and change the color doing this. Now, I like the look of this stroke, and if you wanted to increase the weight of that, you would just increase this number. But I think 5 is a great number. And then of course you can add a background and a shadow to this text, so your shadow is going to be similar to a drop shadow effect. And then of course you can just center this up in the middle, make all of your other corrections, and that is your text now complete. Now your text is going to live on this video layer, as you can see. So you can drag this up onto video layer 2. And if we just select some footage, so let's drag any old footage in, you can see that text is now sitting on top of this video. Now, if you wanted to fade that text on, we can go back to our keyframe animation. We'll go to the very beginning, pull the opacity down to 0%, create a brand new keyframe on the stopwatch icon, move over 1 second, pull up to 100%, move over, create a brand new keyframe on 100 again, and then we'll pull back down to 0. And now when we watch this back, you can see that fades on and then fades off. Now, what I was saying earlier about stacking your videos and your media on top of each other and how it's really important that you want things to be on the top, here is where you'll see what I'm talking about. So because the text is quite transparent, it's on a transparent layer, it's just the text you can see. That means I can put that on top of a video. But if I was to put the video on top of the text, all of a sudden the text has disappeared and it won't appear again until we reduce the opacity or we move this over to reveal it. So the text is still there, it's blocking it. So if this was the text, this is your video, we're just covering it up. That's what's happening here. We're not deleting it, it's still there, it's just being hidden. So it's really important that you get these assets like text animations on your higher levels, and then your footage you put quite low. So now that we've just explored the text or the type tool, you're probably wondering what these other tools here are doing. So you can skip half of these, they don't really matter too much, you won't be using them most of the time. But the ones that you'll be using the most are your selection tool, which is just your normal cursor. Then you've got the next one down, which is the razor tool. And as you can see, that is your cutting tool. So this is just how I would cut the video up. Then as you can see, we have got the pen tool, and the pen tool is going to allow you to draw shapes. So if you select the pen tool and you draw a rectangle here, you'll see we have created a new rectangle shape layer, and that is now living in its own layer, in this graphic layer. And if we go into the shape up here, you can change the color of the shape. You could add a stroke, you could add a background to this. You could select master shape and change all of the settings here and adjust that to the way that you want it to look. But alternatively, you could use that same pen tool to create masks in your video. And essentially a mask is just how you would cut something out. So if I only wanted this BF and I didn't want the rest of the video, then what I would do here is I would select the video, go up to opacity, and as you'll see, that is the same icon, but down here they're calling it the pen tool, and up here it's being called the free draw bezier. So I select that, I draw my mask around the BF, and now that has been isolated. So I can move this around and I can put this exactly where I want it to go. And this is what I do when I'm filming these talking head videos. So when I'm talking to the camera and I'm giving you a demonstration, I take my video, I shrink it down a little bit, then I go to opacity and the free draw bezier tool, and I cut myself out from the video, and I put myself down in the corner so that you can see me talking and interacting with the screen. So that is how you would create that effect. And that's done with that masking effect by using the free draw bezier. But of course, it's not just videos that you can use the free draw bezier tool on. If we go into our project tab and we select the new item button, if we create a new black video, drag that onto your project, then we'll go into effects and search for tint, drag that onto our black video. And now when we go into effect controls, we can change the black to a color of our choice. So let's go for a blue. So now we've got this blue solid. We can now go back into opacity and the free draw bezier tool, and we can draw out another shape, and that is now in its own layer. You will notice though that there is this fuzzy edge around this mask here, and that is because the feather is set to 10. So it's softening off those edges. But if you want that sharp, clean edge, you would pull that down to 0, and that's giving you that sharp shape. However, if you did just want to create a nice glow around an object, then you can pull that all the way up to a number like this, and that's just going to create this really cool glowing effect. So you could put this glow underneath the text, change the size of this mask like this, then you would drag the text layer on top of that layer so that it stands out from that color. And if we move that video, you can see we've got this cool text layer on this glowing blue solid, which looks really cool. Now at this point, I've covered a lot of the basics and a lot of what you would need to know in order to get started. So I'm just going to show you a few more things before we wrap this video up. Now the first one is going to be sound, then we'll talk about color, and then we'll talk about finishing and exporting your video. So taking it from Premiere and turning it into a video file. So let's talk about sound first. Let's bring in a sound clip. So in our audio file, we've got this clip here. We'll drag that onto our timeline. And as you will see at the moment, I've got this M selected, and that is mute track. So because this is the scratch audio from the camera, if we solo that, so we can only hear that, you'll see just on the vector motion, we've got the text for a You'll hear that's not the highest quality audio in the world. Now, if you didn't want to delete that and you wanted to keep it there as reference but not have it in your video, then you would just mute this track and that would just completely hide that from the audio. So every other layer there is now going to be audible. However, if you only wanted to focus on one track, you would select S and it's going to solo that layer. And you can solo multiple different layers at the same time if you wanted to. But essentially what we're doing here is just saying, I only want to listen to this one section. Now you can control the volume of your audio by simply just sliding up or down on this. So by default it's set to 0 decibels, but if you pull that all the way up, I've created our text layer, let's begin. That goes to 15. But if we pull that all the way down, you can see it disappears because we're at the lowest possible level. So you can play with this, and if you wanted to expand the track to get more precise, you would just pull down on this line and you can create a really big track there. And we can use the keyframe animation that we learned earlier to control our audio files. So if we press P on the keyboard, that's going to load up the pen tool, or alternatively, you can come out of this window and select it there. What I'm going to do, maybe this part of the audio we don't want to hear. So I'm going to create a point once this part of the audio has finished, create a point here, and then we're just going to create points here and pull them all the way down. So what's happening here is the volume is set to this level, and then when it hits that point, it ducks down, and then it ducks back up. So you can no longer hear anything that is happening once this has been ducked. And you do the same thing for quiet bits. Maybe you want to hear what is being said, but it's really quiet. Well, you just do the same, but just take it the other direction. And you can do this technique if you want to do fade out as well. So rather than ducking, we can just create a point, create another point, and then drag that second one down, and we're going to fade out. So that is how you would control your audio. Now, color is a big thing in editing because if you're filming in log or flat footage, so you're shooting with a digital SLR or a mirrorless camera or even a cinema camera that can shoot in a flat color profile, you're going to need to squeeze all of the color from that footage. Now, in order to do that, you want to go to the coloring workspace. So you go to Window, Workspaces, and you can select color. And whilst we're in this workspaces window, you can also see there's loads of different workspaces tailored for different stages of the editing process. So you can do an assembly workspace, and this is where you're looking through your footage and just building out your project. Or you could go into audio, and this is where you're going to work on your audio. So you can see you've got your audio levels here, and your audio is going to be visible down here. Of course, you've got captions as well. So this is where we can create some subtitles, and we've got the essential graphics tab here. Color, editing, effects, essentials, graphics, learning, libraries, metalogging, production, review. As you can see, the review is going to work with Frame.io, which is a really cool collaboration between Frame.io and Premiere. It's a way that people can share edits among each other without having to export and send. It's really clever. But then you can also create custom workspaces as well. So I edit typically off 2 monitors. So I've got a 2-screen monitor where I have my preview here and my timeline here on the second monitor. But getting back to where we were going, we're going to talk about color. So we'll go into the color workspace, and that has loaded up the Lumetri color tab and the Lumetri scopes. Now, the Lumetri scopes is just a visual representation of what is happening with your color channels. So you can see you've got blue, green, red, you've got the white, which is going to be your RGB. You've got loads going on there, but we can just ignore that for now. That's probably going to be a little bit too complex for now. So we'll just close that down, and we'll just focus on the Lumetri color tab. So if we just select a video, you can see we've got basic correction. Now we can begin by inputting a LUT, and by default, Premiere has got a few just to get you started. So you've got an Alexa default LUT and a Mira LUT and loads of other LUTs, or you can import your own by going to Browse. So let's just go for the basic LUT. So we'll go for an Alexa default LUT. And if you wanted to, you can make this space really big so you can really see what you're doing with the color. But once you've added that input LUT on, you can adjust some simple settings here. So we can do some color correction by either warming or cooling this down. So I'm just going to warm this up a bit. You can see my skin looks quite white, so I'm going to warm it up a bit. Then we can tint. So typically cameras lean either towards green or purple. So if you've got a camera that leans towards green and your footage looks like this, then you can just slide it towards purple and it will help to smooth that out. Then you've got saturation, which is the intensity of the color. You've got exposure, you've got contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, and so on. And that's your basic correction. So this was before and this is after. You can see that's gone a long way to adding color to that video. Now from here, we'll go to the creative tab, and this is where we can add some color. So we can go into one of these presets. As you can see, that's really intense. But this is where we're now adding some styling. So this stage is more about grading rather than correction. So that's quite nice. If we turn this off and on again, you can see it's adding this cool tint to the video. And of course you can increase or decrease the intensity of that effect. And you've got other settings here. So you've got your saturation, your vibrance, your sharpening. You've got a tint balance if you wanted to add some tint in the shadows or the highlights. And then moving on, we have got curves. Now your hue saturation curves, hue luma, these are probably a bit complicated to get into in this video, but the RGB curves are great. So essentially what I like to do is increase the highlights and decrease the shadows in the RGB channel. This is just going to add some more contrast. So we'll take the upper right point, which is the highlights, and we'll move them to the left to increase the brightness. Now we'll go to the bottom left, which is the shadows, the darker parts of the images. So it's more like up here. And we just pull that to the right to darken. And as you'll see that he's going to crush the color and it's going to really make the video pop. So this was before and this is after. You can see it's really making that video punch. It's really simple. It's a really simple fix. And if you wanted to, you can slightly move the midtones towards one direction if it's not doing exactly what you want to do. So my skin looks a little bit too bright, so I'm just going to pull it down, and that's made that correction. And of course you can isolate specific channels as well. So if you select the red circle, you can select the red channel. So if your shadows look a bit too green, as you can see, I've got a bit of green here in the BF. So I would go to BF, go to the shadows and pull that away. And as you can see, that's just making a very subtle difference, but it's just rounding off that image. So again, this is before curves and this is after curves. Makes a huge difference. Then we go to the color wheels and match, and the color wheels and match are going to give you the option to add color in your shadows, highlights and midtones. So your shadows are these darker parts. Your highlights are the bright parts. So it would be these lights on my skin. And then the midtones are going to be the shades in between. So like this desk or this computer, they're not dark, but they're not bright. They're somewhere in the middle. So you can see you can add color and do exactly what you want, but typically I skip this section. Now we'll go down into HSL secondary, and this is an effect that I use really heavily. HSL secondary is going to allow you to do some very precise color correction and color grading. So you can go in and select a color just to isolate on its own. So let's pick a color in this scene, for example. Let's go for blue. There's quite a predominant blue here. So if we wanted to adjust that, I would select the blue circle. I would move the slider around to select what I'm looking to change. So essentially everything that is gray will not be affected, but everything that is in color will be affected. Now you can adjust the hue, the saturation. So if I don't want the table, you can see I can pull it to the right. It's not very saturated. I only really want to affect the wall. Then you can affect the luminance as well. So the luminance is just the brightness really. Then I'll add a little bit of blur to soften that off. And now you can see if we go into correction, we can change the look of that. So I can actually lean this more towards the greens, or I can make it even more blue if I wanted to. I can mute it down. I could change the temperature. So if I warm that up, it's going to soften that off a bit. I can move it towards the greens or the purples in the tint. And that is how that looks. Now, if I wanted to select my skin tone, I could also do that as well. So maybe I wanted to slightly warm up the color of my skin, give myself a little bit of a tan. That is very possible. To do that, I could either select the red and just slide that across to where I want it to go, or I could use the eyedropper tool, which is basically just a pipette, which is going to select a color. So if I just double check that, you can see that hasn't quite got it right in this instance. So I'm just going to undo that. I'm going to go back to the red, and I'll get a bit more precise by doing it this way. Now, if I go down to blur, I can just soften that off again, just to round off the imperfections of the effect. And now if I go down to temperature, you can see I can add just a little bit of a tan just a little bit. So I'm at 0%. If I pull it up to 10, it's making a very subtle difference. Obviously, you don't want to go ridiculous with this because that is going to look hilarious, but just adding a little bit of saturation and a little bit of temperature in those HSL secondary channels is really going to help to bring a color out. It's going to help that to pop even more. And then of course down here you've got a vignette. So the vignette is the rounding of the edges. So you can either pull that to the left for black or to the right for a white vignette. And of course you can change the midpoint of this, which is just where the center of this is. You can change the roundness and you can feather this off, or you can have it really harsh. I like to have this feathered, and I typically have a black vignette just to close off those edges. And that is your color. Now, if you wanted to, if you didn't want to go through the color tab, you could actually search for Lumetri in the effects tab. So effects is down here now in this tab, in this workspace. And I could search for Lumetri and drop Lumetri color onto a clip. And I've got all the same plugins, but now they're just over here in the effects tab. So if you didn't want to work in the color workspace and you wanted to work in the workspace that you were in before, which was this one, I believe, you can now go through that same process, but we're just over here. So there's your HSL secondary, you've got your curves and all of the other effects. But this was the clip before color and this is the clip after color. You can see it didn't take much to get from this to this. Now at this point, I've taught you pretty much everything you need to know to cut a video, add some title, create some animation, and actually put a video together. There is a lot more for you to know. However, I feel like with all of the information that I've given you, you should now be able to create a video. So essentially, how do we get it out of Premiere and get that onto our files or our documents? Well, that's where we need to go ahead and export. Now, there's many different ways that we can export our video, but the first one and the quickest and the easiest way is to do a quick export. So in order to do that, we just go up to the top right of Premiere, select the quick export icon, and as you can see, you've got the file name and location. So you can save this where you want this to go. Then you've got a preset. So you can go for a match source, adaptive high bitrate, adaptive medium bitrate, or adaptive low bitrate. Essentially, the high bitrate is going to give you a better quality video, but the file size will be bigger. And the low bitrate will give you a lower quality video, but the video size will be smaller, therefore more manageable. So this one's up to you, but typically I go high bitrate, especially when I'm doing anything with client work, because I want it to be as big and as clear as possible. But of course, you've also got high quality 2164K, you've got a downscale 1080 HD, a 720 HD, or a 480 SD wide. So I'm going to go for adaptive high bitrate. And as you can see, we've got a quick summary here. So it's a H.264, 3840 by 2160, 25 frames per second with a 63.3 megabits per second export. The duration is going to be 15 minutes, 2 seconds and 14 milliseconds with the stereo, audio, and the estimated file size for that 15-minute video is going to be 7,177 megabytes, which is 7.1 gig. So it's a lot. Alternatively though, if you wanted to, you could only export a specific part of your video. So if we only wanted this colored section here, we would select I at the start. So that is I on your keyboard. Go a few seconds over to where you want this to finish and press O. And that is our in and out. So now when we do that same thing, we go for a quick export. You can see the file size now is 95 megabits because the duration is now 11 seconds. So if we press export, that's just going to encode and export that video. And if we go into our Finder, there it is at video1_1. We can play this back and that has now been exported into our files. So we can do what we want with this video. We can upload that or we can send it to a hard drive, do what we want. Now this option is really great if you want to skip all the technical stuff and just have a video exported ready to go. But if you would like more precision and more control on the export settings, so for example, do you want a compressed or a varied bit rate? Do you want to have a really high quality export or a low quality export? Do you want to put this into ProRes, MXF, QuickTime, H.264? You can find all of these other export settings in the main export window. And the main export window is going to be found in File, Export, Media. And as you'll see instantly, this is much more advanced. So as you can see, if we just quickly look at this, we've got a preview of the video. And these lines here are representing our in to out points. So it's saying the source is 15 minutes, but the output is going to be 11 seconds. So if we wanted to export the entire video, we would just expand those out, and that is now saying output 15 minutes. Of course, we can shorten that down if we wanted to. Now from here, you've got your location, so where this is going to get saved to, and you've got your preset. I'd always start with a preset because now we can go and make some further changes to this. This is your format, and I like to go to H.264. I feel like there's a great compromise between quality and file size, but of course you've got all of these other settings here as well. If you're doing anything for TV, for example, then you've got Apple ProRes MXF OP1A, or you have got the MXF OP1A down here as well. Or alternatively, you've got QuickTime as well. But you've got all of those settings there. Now, if we go into video, if we go into more, you can see you've got frame size, frame rate, field order, aspect ratio, and then you've got even more down here. So we can render this at a maximum depth and use a maximum render quality. We can change the time interpolation from frame sampling to frame blending to optical flow. We've got different ways of exporting, so you could use the hardware or you could use the software to export this. Then you've got the bitrate settings, and this is the one that I find is the most important. Typically, I like to go for CBR, and for a low quality video export, I go for around 20. But for a high quality export, I go anywhere between 50 to 100. If the video that I'm exporting is over 10 minutes, then I'll pull that closer to 50. And as you'll see, the estimated size is going to be around 2 gig, which is about right. But if I was doing a much shorter video, then I could pull the quality of that even higher up. And even though it's 100 megabits per second, we're still only at 500 meg for the file size. So that's just a little bit of a juggle. So play with that slider to find an output size that you're happy with. Then you've got the audio, and you can get into AAC or MPEG audio. You can change the sample rate. You can change from stereo to mono to 5.1. You go to bitrate and increase the bit rate. You've got loads of different other settings as well, including effects and metadata. So you can create a separate sidecar file with your metadata, and you can change that metadata dialog by just putting in all of this information here. But once you've put all of that in, you can now go ahead and press the same thing, press the export button, and Premiere will take its time to export that video. So if it's a short video, it may only take a few minutes, but if it's a big video, it may take a little bit longer. But there you go. That is Adobe Premiere Pro summed up in one video. Now, there's a lot more that I haven't got into. There are many different effects. There's many different features and plugins. You've got the auto transcribe feature. You've got caption. You've got AI powered technology inside of Premiere Pro. There is so much to Premiere. So I would definitely recommend spending the time learning the software and getting better at using the program. Now, I've been editing on Premiere since I was 14 years old. I'm 28 now, so that is 14 years I've been on Premiere. That is half my life, and there's still things in Premiere that I don't know. I don't have the right techniques for certain things and certain effects. You're always going to be learning when you're editing in Premiere, but the basic core effects are going to be an absolute staple. And just by watching this video time and time again and putting in your own time and research into Premiere is what's really going to count. It's no good just watching a bunch of tutorials. It's really important that you get into Premiere, download some footage, shoot some footage, and just have a play with it in Premiere. The more time you can spend editing and learning and adapting your skills, the better you're going to be. So with that said, if you're still here and you're still watching this video, then thank you ever so much for staying with me. I really hope this longer video has been helpful and more beneficial to you than the shorter videos. But of course, now that you have this core understanding of how Adobe Premiere Pro works, you can now jump into some of the shorter videos which delve more into specific effects and specific features of Premiere. And hopefully you will now become a better video editor. So thanks again, and hopefully I will see you on the next video. See you there.